Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 348, I chat with Brian Markwalter, Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association, about the audio and video landscape. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded April 6th, 2017. Episode 348, The Audio-Video Landscape. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Brian Markwalter, Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association. Hey, Brian, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Scott. It's great to be back.
Nice to have you back with us. You were here about a year ago, just after CES 2016. So we're going to take another look at the state of the consumer electronics industry, particularly with respect to audio and video. But before we do, let me quickly make a point that those who are watching live at live.twit.tv can join the chat room there, or you can go to irc.twit.tv, and you can post questions as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. It always helps if you use my screen name, Scott Wilkinson, no dots or dashes, somewhere in the message, because then it shows up in a different color on my screen and my eye is more easily drawn to it. So, Brian, Consumer Technology Association, or CTA, is the organization that puts on CES every year, one of the largest trade shows in the world. How was attendance this year?
Oh, Scott, it was fantastic. In fact, the show was record-setting in many ways. So the show, in terms of exhibit space, was 2.6 million net square feet. So you called it correctly. It is the largest technology trade show in the world. Maybe the largest show in the world, but it's definitely the largest technology trade show in the world. We had more than 180,000 attendees at the show.
Wow. Last year it was in the 170,000 range, so it did, in fact, increase.
Correct, and we were not sure what to expect. If you remember, the dollar was very strong, so it just wasn't clear what would happen, particularly with international attendance. And then as it turned out, we set a record for international attendance too. So we had more than 60,000 people from outside the U.S. at the show, and that was a record. So it was a fantastic show, all in all. More than 4,000 exhibitors, and you've been there many years. It's a thing to behold in our industry.
It is a thing to behold, yes. Speaking of which, I was about to say, yes, I've been going for over 25 years now, and consecutively. I don't think I've missed a single one in all that time.
That was half of them, as you know.
That's half of them, yeah, because this year was 50. This year was the 50th anniversary, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, there used to be, and this is a little bit aside from what we're going to talk about today, but I am really curious about this. There used to be a program wherein it's normally not open to the public, right? You have to be in the industry to come to the show. But there used to be a program where consumers, or enthusiasts, I guess you would say, could get a ticket to the show at least part of the time. Is that still happening, or is that just not available anymore?
No, so we treat it as a trade show, which is what our exhibitors want. It's it's kind of hard to do both. You're either serving business or serving consumers, and so you are supposed to be part of the industry, and it's vetted, and that's why our exhibitors like it. Frankly, as they have dozens of meetings while they're there, and the press guys like you all are
yeah, they want meetings with me for sure.
Yeah,
but also with their dealers. And with ad salespeople as well. I'm a member of the press, and the press survives on ad sales. And so our ad sales guy goes out and meets with these people and tries to drum up business. You're right. That's what the show is for.
Yes. Yeah. So it's kind of everybody everybody in the business has a chance to have as many meetings as possible. Plus, you just get to walk the floor and see everything that's going on, which is probably more like what we're going to talk about. But it is the kind of the technology calendar for the year. I think it sort of it kicks off there, and then you get to see what's going to get rolled out during the year.
Well, in some cases, in many cases, in some cases, I've certainly seen it happen. I'm sure you have too, where a company will introduce some really cool looking product that never shows up, never gets actually released.
Sure, there are prototypes and other conceptual products, and we have all the automotive manufacturers are there now. You've probably seen Northall. I know that's not where we want to spend our time talking, but they'll show concept cars, and they'll show they've actually launched new models at CES. So who'd have thought that a car would be introduced at CES? But that's kind of where we are in terms of technology these days.
Yeah. So what were the highlights as far as you're concerned in terms of audio and video?
Yeah, there were a lot. So we're clearly well into Ultra HD, the 4K, the resolution part. So we've seen full lines of models from the manufacturers. I think what we saw a lot more of was high dynamic range, HDR coming into the full line of products. A lot of different demos in that area. OLED, we're seeing more production in the OLED space. New manufacturers getting involved, and then quantum dot. So if you like, Samsung's branding is the QLED, but better, more energy efficient, brighter displays, and that goes hand in hand with the HDR. So HDR, you're trying to achieve much higher dynamic range than we've had in the past with TVs, and that's it's a technical challenge. We'll talk about some of the other challenges of getting the content all the way to the TV. But things like quantum dots, we need to do this really efficiently because there is pressure to have TVs use as the least amount of power possible. And audio, there's I'm sure we'll spend some more time on this. Immersive audio, we have some new formats coming out in that area, so it's getting traction. And consumers love convenience, so wireless is certainly a big part of all that.
Well, you're right. We are going to talk about all of that in a little while, but I wanted to start with another trend that I saw there last year as well as this year, which is virtual reality and augmented reality, or VR and AR. Those seem to be pretty big things that a lot of people were talking about and showing stuff at CES, right?
Yes, absolutely. It was a huge storyline of the show. You're right. We had an area dedicated to that. There were a lot of announcements in that space, and so we're seeing. What we saw is there was the launch of a number of products. So we have a whole range of augmented reality and virtual reality. In fact, as you know, it's a really complicated space. There's a gamut of technologies that span from augmented, where you're not really, you're just, your video is really kind of what you're looking at, but you're not trying to make a person feel like they are present somewhere else, which is what VR is about. So, VR completely occludes your vision. You capture them. That's why you wear the head-mounted displays. And we saw that whole range. In fact, CTA is getting involved in that space, but it is a big growth area and demonstrated at the show.
In fact, speaking of growth, we have a couple of graphics to show that, numbers 1 and 2. So tell us what we're looking at here.
Yeah, so this is this comes from our annual sales and forecast, one of our most popular research products. We talked about the association owning and producing the show. We also track industry sales for the industry, and so we are forecasting VR. And began doing that last year as the products hit the market. So you can see 79% growth, which is fantastic. 2.5 million units. This is for 2017. and $660 million in revenue. So
this is an estimation. This is an estimation for 2017.
Correct. This is our forecast. And so, it's a new market, which is where you expect to see your high growth numbers, like, getting anything close to approaching 100%. If you hit triple digits, you're at the beginning of the hockey stick, as they say. So
right.
We're excited to see it. We know a lot of those units are the smaller, like the smartphone-based VR technologies, the platform, head-mounted displays, Sony, PlayStation VR, and Oculus. Those products, they don't sell quite as many because it's a higher-end experience, and we all know, they're the lower end just due to elasticity and availability. But we move lots and lots. I mean, you think about 2.5 million units. That's a lot of any kind of new technology.
Mm-hmm. And then we have graphic number 2, just to illustrate what's going on in terms of, look at that growth curve. Talk about a hockey stick.
Yes. So this shows, I showed you the 2.5 million, the single number, but on the left side, that is, how we've tracked. And you could see, we were introducing 2013, 14, 15, initial products. And then 2016, when you start hitting, so you had the HTC Vive, Oculus, you had Samsung VR.
Gear,
Yeah. All hitting the market, and then rounded out with Sony got completely into the market, got their product launched before the holiday selling season. So that set us up for 2017. Some of the other statistics there, CTA also does consumer research, and we do it across all sorts of things, but it's fun to do it in areas like this, a new area. So we want to help the manufacturers and other parts of the industry understand where consumers are coming at this. So this is interesting in that often a new technology, many times we'll measure awareness first. We'll just ask how many people know about something. That's where that 70% number comes from. Mm-hmm. And so that awareness is pretty good if you think about a technology this new. Some of that may be the Pokemon Go phenomenon. They got, that I think raised awareness. At least people kind of got introduced to AR types of things, even if they didn't really think about what their experience was.
Right.
But
put that name to it, you mean?
Yeah. So I don't think they do now. They just, if you just ask, have you heard of or aware, they'll say, a high percentage, 70% say yes. On the other hand, fewer than 20% have experienced it. And part of what we do, a lot of times we've done focus groups. We will help retailers and the manufacturers try to understand how consumers shop for and experience these new technologies. And one of those things, so this last point on there, about 32% of the online adults are unsure of device requirements. So this relates to with some of these products, particularly ones that are PC based, it may not be clear what all they have to have. I mean, even if they know about VR, might be interested. For some of them, it's a complex selling proposition. So what
seems like it to me, yeah, because you need some sort of headset typically, yes. and in the case of the Samsung Gear VR, you need a Samsung smartphone to stick in there, and that becomes the display that's sitting there right in front of your eyes. That isn't an easy thing to communicate, as opposed to, say, a TV. Well, you go buy a new TV, you put it in your living room, you plug it in, and you watch it.
Correct. Yeah. So, like your Samsung example, once you have those components, you're done. But with one that operates on a PC-based system, you like a Oculus, you'll need a PC, and you probably need a nicer PC to really do VR well. Something that's closer to like a gaming rig. And then Sony, I think one of the nice things about Sony is that if you had a PlayStation, so they could market it to their own customers, and so that was maybe a little bit easier description for them.
But that some of those statistics that we showed in that graphic were a little surprising. Under 20% of the people you surveyed had actually experienced VR. And I've long maintained that any new technology like high dynamic range or immersive audio or VR in this case really depends upon people actually experiencing it. I mean, my job is to write about it and reveal things and hopefully explain things, but I can do that as, you know, till doomsday, and it's not the same as somebody going and actually experiencing it. So is there anything being done to kind of improve that statistic that less than 20% of people have actually experienced it?
Yeah, so that's clearly the challenge that the retailers and the manufacturers face, and that's part of why we do this research. Of course, as you noted, this is a pretty well-known phenomenon. As my boss likes to say, it's like describing ice cream. You know, it just you can describe it all you want, but it's the sensation, the taste, and everything that matters. So we saw this with Ultra HD. You see it with HDR, that you can describe how spectacular a picture is and how realistic, but we know from we've done intercepts after consumers have gone into retail environments and, you know, seen some of these things for the first time. We know that's like a transformational thing. It's an easy sale once you get them to experience. And if you've tried VR or seen people at a show trying it, you know what a good VR demo is like, and you get this what we call the VR smile. People put on that the headset, and they get, you know, they suddenly become immersed in another environment, and it's just it's a great experience.
Yeah, one of the things at CES that what really struck me was in the convention center, in the grand concourse, which is kind of this big hallway down the middle of the convention center. I think it was at Samsung,
Samsung,
who put together almost like a VR theater, right? So there's 30 or 40 seats, and people are wearing these Samsung Gear things on their heads. And if you're not sitting in one of those seats and you walk by, you see these 30 or 40 people with these things on, smiling, and, you know, I think, as I recall, even the whole platform kind of moved around a little bit to give you a little motion simulation going on. And you could see they were all very happy about it.
Yeah. So it moved more than a little. It's actually very close to an amusement ride. It was like a VR simulator, and it would turn people all the way upside down. I don't know. I hope they warned people, but you know,
I didn't see that.
Yes, it would. And I think maybe you could tell them how much experience you wanted, but you know, you saw those people. It was like 30 of them laughing and shouting and everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was pretty cool stuff.
You know, the application that stumps me still is I've seen VR goggles being used on roller coasters, literal real roller coasters. I think Six Flags maybe does it. I can't remember. Somebody in the chat room might know. But you know, you put on the VR goggles and then you go on a roller. What are you looking at? What could be more exciting or more terrifying in my case than actually being on a real roller coaster?
Yeah, no, I hadn't seen that. There are some interesting applications beyond the consumer space. You know, we mostly track the consumer portion, but VR and AR are both going to be used for training. They're being used in business environments. They'll be used for medical work. They're talking about using it for surgeons to kind of prepare complicated surgeries. So we're going to see a lot of very interesting things. And there are some VR, I don't know what you want to call them, like VR parks or recreation things. There's some in the U.S.
There's one right there.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, sure enough. Yes. Found it.
Look at that. Yeah, our engineer Josh is a whiz. He's just great. And look at that. You're on a roller coaster with a headset on. I mean, what are they looking? Oh, you can see on the right-hand side what it is they're looking at, what they're actually seeing, while at the same time being moved around and gravity playing. Man. Okay, so you're in Star Wars or some sort of space battle there.
Oh, excellent. Yeah,
wow.
There we go.
See, I myself could not do that. I am somewhat prone to motion sickness. I don't even like butt kickers. You know what I'm talking about there? The
yeah.
tactile transducers under your seat.
Yes.
That shake you around with explosions or rocket blasts off or whatever. And you know, years ago when Runco was at CEDIA, at the CEDIA trade show, and they would have a demo, and I went in and sat down, and it was one of these butt kicker things, and I immediately got up and ran out of the room because I said it makes me sick. And so the next time I went next year when they were there, they said, "Oh, look, we've got a special seat for you, no butt kicker."
Okay. A seat with your name on. Yeah, so I would
exactly.
need to either pick VR or pick the roller coaster, but not both for me, I think.
For me, yeah, definitely. Although, you know, for the adrenaline junkies out there, it probably is a hell of a ride.
Yep.
Look at that. So yeah, they obviously talked about that on the screensavers. All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, one of the things that CTA has been working on, I think you mentioned to me in some of our conversations offline, is content creation guidelines for AR and VR. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So since VR is a new area, and one of the other things that CTA does, we create standards. One of my groups here works with the industry to write standards. So the things we're most well known for, the closed captioning standard in the U.S. is one of ours. And so our VR members, we have a VR working group, and they came to us and said, look, we need to kind of get some of the terminology straightened out. And that's not uncommon either when in a new area, companies start using terms, but don't necessarily use them the same way. So, for example, in this area, there's AR, VR, there's mixed reality. Some people use the term merged reality. There's also the related technology of 360-degree viewing. And so we do have a standards group that is launching and to work on the terminology portion so that we get the definitions right. And then the other two pieces are to create content guidelines for the creation of AR content, and then a separate one for the creation of VR content. And a lot of that has to do with capturing practices so that the content that you create is gives the users a good experience. So, you know, it's like 3D. It can be done poorly, and so you need to be careful about how you're creating VR content. So that's where we're going to go.
Wow. So you're just getting started on that. Maybe we'll have you back in a year and talk about the progress, because I have to tell you, in my personal experience, with the VR that I have seen, I've not been that impressed, particularly with regard to resolution. You know, I can clearly see pixel structure, and obviously here's where we need higher pixel density. And also moving around isn't necessarily seamless. So it seems to me there's quite a ways to go yet before it reaches kind of the level that home theater, TV, and so on is now.
Yeah, so I think you're right. That's why there's so much invention and so many companies working hard in this space. So and just think of how many decades it took us to get to 4K resolution.
Well, true.
And so, you know, VR, it's actually a really difficult technical challenge. You're right. You want high resolution. You want that resolution very close to your eyes. You need to keep the heat down, so you need something really efficient. You want it lightweight, and you got a double resolution problem. So it's like 3D. You need a left eye view and a right eye view. So you're trying to get all that in a display. So. But I think the industry normally rises to those challenges. So I think we'll definitely see the resolution increase. Frame rate, I'm sure they'll work on, and then it'll always be a challenge trying to get just physically get that to where it's a nice lightweight product. But they'll keep working on it.
So there aren't any standards at the moment for AR or VR are there in terms of resolution, frame rate, color gamut, dynamic range, that sort of thing?
No, because so right now we're in a period where it's kind of platform based, if you will. So, like I think the major platform providers have, like Sony has recommendations. They achieve a certain format, resolution, refresh rate, and everything. So right now, I don't think we have a compatibility problem. We probably want to raise the bar, so to speak, as you mentioned. But and I think there are some understood metrics, but not necessarily standards. Like for example, I think most people will say there's the phenomenon of like when you move your head, the display is supposed to track with it. That's where if you get the lag, that's where some of the motion sickness comes from. And so it's the benchmark for that is 20 milliseconds. That what they call motion to photon is what the insiders call it. So when you move your head, within 20 seconds,
20 milliseconds.
Yes, 20 milliseconds. The what's being displayed better catch up, or your brain gets unhappy with it.
Now, you mentioned 3D, and obviously VR is 3D as well. And you have to wear a thing to see it. And we know that 3D in the home, anyway, came and went. It's almost gone now. There are virtually no TVs that have it. Some projectors still do. But a lot of people complained about having to wear glasses. And VR gear, Samsung gear or anything else, a headset, is even more cumbersome than wearing a pair of glasses. So is this going to be a big hindrance to the adoption of VR, you think? In the home, anyway?
So I think it's just such a different experience. True VR. So the VR that gives what they call presence, where it makes you feel like you are somewhere else. So those have to capture your whole field of vision. The good ones also create an audio experience that goes with it, and haptic if possible. So
I mean, haptic meaning touch sensory.
Yes, yeah, which is why many of the systems have some sort of controllers. And they don't necessarily have feedback, but you need to be able to interact with that environment somehow. So, in that sense, I think it's just different from the 3D, where maybe we expected people to sit down in what was a lean back environment, and so then the idea of wearing glasses for an extended period of time, or like you're watching a movie together and everybody's watching it. So VR is it's different, but the experience is transformative enough. I think most people will use it. Now there's the issue of whether they'll use it for long form content. Gamers clearly are using it. There's quite a bit of gaming content. And I think it will be used for certain experiences, and we'll see. This is what the learning part of the process is.
Yeah, exactly. Bleep Blurp in the chat room is saying 1 second of VR can take 100 hours to create.
Yes, there's a whole nother complex world about how we're going to deliver VR. So if you think about, you stream a movie, we understand what you're streaming, whatever the resolution is, maybe HDR. So with VR, if you're trying to do that remotely, you're trying to send a whole 360-degree environment. So if the user turns, then all that content has to be there. It's like it's like Blu-ray all the way around you. So
that also has struck me as being odd about VR, that there's an awful lot of content, visual content anyway, that is never used at any given moment. You're only looking in this way, and occasionally you might look over your shoulder or look behind you or whatever. But most of the time, that stuff behind you has to be there, as you say. But it's not being perceived. It's not being looked at. It's wasted. It seems inefficient to me.
Yeah, but I mean, it's part of the experience. But the standards, the people are working on like streaming standards. So part of what they're doing is you send all the content for what's in sort of this field of view, if you will, and you may be sending like a low resolution version of the stuff where they might turn their head. So they're working very hard. I mean, it's just like any other form of compression. You're trying to only send what you need when you need it. Yep.
Exactly right. Emily the Strange in the chat room is saying probably AR is a bit more acceptable than 3D because it's more interactive. 3D was more passive. That's perhaps a good point. Also, let's see, there was another one here. There was another one. Oh, dang, I can't find it now. Dean's line says, I'd like to feel like I'm on the set if I'm watching a movie in VR. That actually brings up an interesting point. Watching a movie in VR, maybe reproducing, and I've thought of this too, like on an airplane or something like that, when you could put on the VR glasses or gear and see a 100-inch screen, what looks like a 100-inch screen in front of you playing a movie. That may not be the most useful application of VR, but it seems like one.
Yes. And going back to the point of kind of being on the movie set, so there's there's going to be a whole nother way of storytelling with VR. I wouldn't say it's the opposite, but if you think about it in traditional movie directing and what you're doing with a movie, you're creating this experience where the techniques that people have honed over many years are used to direct your attention to certain places, and there's
exactly
a lot you can do. So now they have to start thinking about, well, how do I get the viewer, if you will, the participant, to look somewhere? What clues do you give them? Right. Plus, it just changes the whole idea. I mean, you can set up a set to behave a certain way, shooting in 360 where you get everything. And we already know some of this, because there's been 360 and VR experiences for like concerts, music and stuff. And so you go to set up, well, just the fact that you're setting up these cameras, first of all, you're probably in there among the people. Often you're in the front. And if you look around, well, you're probably going to see, in some cases, you see camera equipment itself, which isn't what you're trying to convey. But so it'll be interesting for a few years, I think.
Well, certainly, as you say, brand new. I just also wanted to mention that I know that there have been a couple of VR streaming opportunities for people to experience it. The most recent one was during March Madness, this basketball tournament. The last six of the last games, including the final game, was available to be streamed in VR. And another example, I think, might have been the Olympics, or there was something else recently that was available to stream in VR. And so we might very well see that in terms of, pretending you're at the game or feeling like you're at the game when, in fact, you're not.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of interest in those areas, things that are, and like I mentioned, so music concerts where there's only a finite number of people who are going to experience it, and but you have people who are big fans, maybe are willing to experience it through VR. So that I think we'll see a lot more of that, and that'll help raise the awareness also, and We'll get above that 20% number as more people get an opportunity to try it out.
Barfel says, VR seems to be a solo experience, whereas movie watching is often done by several people at once. And this is another concern I have about VR, that it's really pretty isolating.
Yeah, so there's, it is, and there will be that challenge of genres that are kind of inherently social. There are some really interesting things going on around shared experiences. So if you think it's hard to just generate a VR experience by itself, there are companies, Technicolor, for example, and others are trying to figure out how to have people interact. So you could actually play, in effect, multiplayer games. And so your person, if you will, sort of like an avatar, you can become inserted in to a game experience, and then there could be somebody else playing that game with you. But you're right, like kind of an art experience, like a movie might be. It's less clear, how that would be shared. But certain things for sure in gaming. But you also might, there's some things. I think there's already been trailers and VR content that's been associated with movie releases. So that might be, those are the experiences that are more VR focused, and then the actual movie itself, I think, will be experienced in the traditional way for many years.
Right. I think actually, now that I think of it, Sony's the movie Passengers, Jennifer Lawrence and Chris Pratt, I believe, in a spaceship. Sony did some sort of VR experience associated with that movie. It was different than the movie, but it was associated with it. So that was one example. And at CES, not this year, but last year, I think, Technicolor showed some VR content based on the movie The Martian.
Yes.
And I saw that, and again, I thought, this resolution isn't very good, and there's some lag, and but of course that was a year and some months ago, so I hope things have improved since then.
Yeah, I'm sure they have. Well, that part is hardware dependent. That is the
true
part
enough.
where things get better as technology improves.
Right. Beatmaster has a good question here about isolation with VR. How many people are watching video on their second screens compared to people coming into home theaters made with multiple guests in mind? So I guess that begs the question about second screen. Do you guys do any research on that?
Oh yeah, we probably should have dug into that. We do quite a bit. So we do try to spend time understanding the change in consumer viewing habits, the dual screen use and everything. So I don't remember stats off the top of my head. There are some bases. So we know, for example, younger people tend to be higher users of smaller screens, but we also know conversely that people will usually gravitate to their best available screen. So it's a little bit opportunistic. So where like younger people have a college-age daughter, so she's happy to be watching video on her phone. But most people, when they get home or get in an environment where they have a bigger screen, particularly if they're going to watch longer form content, will move to a bigger screen. Now, there is a lot of simultaneous screen usage. It's not always associated. So you might be watching a TV show, and there may be browsing. They may be looking at something associated with the show, or they may just be doing some social networks. Yeah, Snapchat or whatever with their friends.
Right. I can't do that. But I've never been able to do that. Even as a youngster, I was not a multitasker. In fact, I don't believe multitasking is real. I think it's an illusion, but that's another story. Well, speaking of bigger screens, I wanted to make sure we talked some about 4K, or really what should be called UHD, Ultra HD, because those two terms aren't exactly synonymous. They kind of are in the public's mind, I think, and maybe even in the manufacturers' marketing departments. But technically speaking, they're not exactly the same.
I'm sorry, I lost the connection for just a second between UHD and what, Scott? Yeah, sorry.
Oh, and 4K, between UHD and 4K. Those two terms are actually mean something slightly different, although they have sort of become synonymous.
Yeah, so we'll do a little trip down the memory lane here, which isn't that old. So when UHD was coming out, CTA we did some research with consumers. The industry had not selected a name yet, and so we did some testing. 4K was actually being used in movie theaters. I think the industry well enough. So it came out through the theater business as we went to digital cinema.
Right.
So there's one camp who was saying we should use 4K. That wasn't really a TV term. So when TVs launched, we did some research, and consumers understood Ultra HD, maybe because they'd been so trained. They'd been through the SD to HD transition. Ultra HD made sense to them. 4K, we got reactions like, well, that sounds like, a foot race or something. So
yeah, exactly.
So we created a logo, which you can find on TVs today, and we picked Ultra HD, and we attached the 4K. So our official term is 4K UHD, which conveys the minimum 4K resolution. But then, of course, now Ultra HD means more than that, because since 4K became available, we've added high dynamic range. Then frame rates are going to increase, and bit depth is increasing. So for a lot of people, Ultra HD is a package of improvements to.
True enough. I was really only talking about the pixel density or pixel resolution. So
yes.
4K in the commercial cinema and going out to the movies theater, 4,096 pixels across, 2160 pixels down. UHD is 33,840 pixels across and 2160 down. So, there's a few percentage points difference in the actual number of pixels on the screen. But that seems to have kind of gone by the wayside. And as you say, and rightly so, UHD as a term now means a lot of other things besides just pixel density. But that's still part of it.
Yes, a big part of it. I mean,
a big part of it.
Although there's a lot of research. There's indication from some research that high dynamic range is more perceptible to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
But you've seen HD and UHD demos. Probably, I'm sure you've seen side by sides, and you know how stunning the picture is. So, you're correct. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say with HD next to UHD, with the same dynamic range, unless you get pretty close to the screen, the difference is, in my view, marginal, shall we say? Because a good Blu-ray can look mighty fine. Oh yeah, that is true, but that's it's not unlike the experience that we had with HD. In fact, I think a lot of us, and I put myself in this camp, believe that early sales of HD TVs were related to DVDs, and I don't mean Blu-ray, I mean DVDs. So consumers just had not had that great of an experience, and DVD was in effect some of the best SD video they could get. So they're quite happy, even though they compared to VHS, for example.
Yeah, they probably thought they were watching HD, honestly, and eventually they probably got the service and everything. But you're right. I mean, the 4K. So the truth is, sales are going up fast.
They sure are. In fact, we have graphic number 3 to show to illustrate that.
Yep.
3 and 4. Let's start with 3. Tell us what we're looking at here.
Okay. Yeah. So we, televisions are still a big part of the overall business. We sell roughly 40 million units a year in the U.S. For something that is in 98% of homes or so and been around for decades, it shows up in the top. Usually is in the wish list or the intent to buy top 2 or 3. So what we're showing here is the growth in the 4K Ultra HD portion of that market. So the total number of TVs has been kind of flat. It's actually going to decline slightly this year, but the UHD sales are going to go up by 51% and hit 15.6 million units. So
in 2017, you mean?
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the next graphic, number 4, shows us, and this I love, the relative performance in terms of shipment of product of TVs in the first year of HD, first 3 years rather of HD versus the first 3 years of UHD.
Correct.
And
so man,
look at that.
Yeah. So we felt like it felt like a fast takeoff to the Ultra HD market. It felt to us, and then so one of our market research guys. Well, and it was true. So as it turns out, it was true. So the blue bars are the HD TV transition, and
in their first 3 years,
in their first 3 years. So they're different. We've lined up them according to first year, second year, third year of launch, and you can see the difference in the uptake. So some of that, I mean, there's obviously some nuances going on here. We were transitioning from analog to HD. We were not yet fully in the flat panel area. So as you remember the first, there were some big, it was hard to do HD 16:9 with a CRT.
Yes.
Those were some heavy TVs, as you recall.
Boy, I do. Man, I'm sure glad those days are gone.
Yes. So it was a little bit easier transition, I think, to the Ultra HD technology because the flat panel production technology could accommodate it a little quicker.
Right, exactly. And in fact, that's kind of why I think manufacturers, last time you were on the show, we were talking about this a little bit, that manufacturers, I think, jumped the gun a little bit and started putting out UHD and 4K TVs with 4 times the number of pixels because they already had the infrastructure. It wasn't that big a deal to make 4K LCD TVs than to make 2K or 1080p LCD TVs. So they did, because now they could say, hey, here's a new thing. You should buy a new TV. But it was somewhat premature. Now I think the rest of the industry is catching up a bit. We have a lot of 4K content now. We have UHD Blu-ray now, which looks mighty fine to me. And those studios who might have sort of said, what? Wait, we're not ready for that yet, a couple of years ago, now are starting to crank it out pretty good.
Yes, you're right. So there was a little bit of industry tension. Sorry, let me get my. We were able to do resolution first, and that wasn't an easy transition. Although a lot of content was being captured in 4K, it was not necessarily being produced in 4K. So we heard that a lot. And then distribution was more difficult until we had Ultra HD Blu-ray, and now streaming services that are caught up to it. But it kind of all comes out. We were saying this back 2 years ago, that really there are 5 areas in which TVs can improve. Resolution was the one that was just happened to be hit first and could go to market cost effectively. Now the truth is, it's probably good. It's good for the content industry. The upscaling has been very good in those products, so consumers are happy with it. And I think that opens the door. At least we don't have the chicken and egg situation that you typically have. Consumers were happy to buy these TVs and very pleased with our product, even with a relative lack of content for them, because they made such good pictures. And
even with lower resolution material, thanks to good quality upscalers.
Correct. Yep. And now as we fold in HDR, it's just going to continue. So the truth is, the TVs, in my opinion, they're going to be able to handle the content as it gets produced, and as, for example, ATSC 3.0 comes online in a couple of years and streaming gets faster, and then satellite and cable, make more of these HDR and 4K products available.
Right. We still don't have, I don't think we have any 4K from cable companies, maybe a little bit, but mostly not. We have only a little bit from satellite. It's almost all streaming or UHD Blu-ray.
Correct. And, we saw there's kind of this competitive tipping point. So HD, if you remember in the early days of that transition, there wasn't clear who was going to move first. And then it became actually ESPN committed to HD. And then the network started falling all over themselves. It was a big, it became a big competitive thing as who had more HD channels. So I don't know if we're in the same business dynamics now, but, I think as consumers get used to seeing it and have a certain experience on one platform, they'll start asking for it on another platform.
You mentioned ATSC, the Advanced Television Systems Committee, which is currently that's the over-the-air broadcast standard ATSC 1.0 for HD, high definition, standard dynamic range. Now they're working on ATSC 3.0, which we've talked about on the show a number of times. Last year, when you were on this show, you said that ATSC 3.0 ATSC was committed to getting its work done by the end of 2016. Did they make it?
So can I say yes? Let's say they got the initial parts out, the what they call the 5, which is the basic modulation scheme, and so I think most of what they call the core standards are done now. There may be a little bit, but it's easier to point to what's not done. There's a whole suite of standards that are done. We're doing joint testing in Cleveland with NAB. There's other test stations running. And maybe the strongest indicator is that Korea has committed to Ultra HD TV broadcast using ATSC 3.0. So there was just a meeting there. And so they're committed actually to broadcast the Seoul Olympics in 2018. So they are going to be shipping products this year. So that it's going to happen. They're actually going to lead the market a little bit, which is slightly reversed from our experience.
ATSC 1.0, where the U.S. led the market, I think, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, so the Koreans might be coming out ahead. And, of course, LG and Samsung, the two big Korean companies, in our space anyway, will hopefully actually release product, which will need to be, do you think we're going to see set-top tuners? Because putting a tuner inside a TV, takes some time to design and build into that. Whereas if you have a 4K TV now or UHD, it'll be easier to just buy a set-top box. Do you think we're going to see those initially?
So I think there's a good chance we'll see both. So one big difference this time is that CTA has filed a petition jointly with the National Association of Broadcasters. We're asking for a voluntary transition. Last go round, it was highly structured. It was mandated by the government. There was a whole schedule for the transition. So voluntary means we need to, broadcasters need to get on the air with 3.0 transmissions, and we need to ship products that's compatible. And so companies will be adding 3.0 tuners to their TVs. I don't think it's necessarily super hard, but you also have a lot of legacy TVs out there, and ATSC 3.0 is not backwards compatible. So to get all these nice benefits like Ultra HD and high dynamic range, and interactivity, so we had to kind of break compatibility. So there are lots of discussions about kind of both, that there would be a little gateway type product, sort of like a converter box, but
I remember those old converter boxes.
Yeah. But so the main difference in the thinking now is converter box you put in front of an SD TV. So in this case, the idea is that you sort of do more like a gateway type product, because a lot of TVs are smart or Wi-Fi enabled. So you put one of these boxes in your house, and then it rebroadcasts 3.0 on your home network. So then you can bring along your legacy TVs with you. It makes the transition easier.
So what is the state of receiver standards? You said that the major parts of ATSC are done. I know that the immersive audio, for example, is kind of odd, but it's Dolby AC4 in the US and probably elsewhere, and Fraunhofer's MPEG-H elsewhere. And that seems a little strange to me. Couldn't they come up with one?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, a lot of people in the industry feel like it's better to pick one when you can. But, for an international broadcast standard, sometimes there are just regional differences. So in this case, broadcast is regulated on a regional basis. So I don't know that it's going to necessarily be a big problem. We used a Dolby technology currently, so perhaps it made sense to use AC4 in this case. But both audio technologies, first of all, they're much better, and they're both available, so they'll be deployed. And then you also asked about the receiver standards. So
Yes.
yeah, actually CTA is working on them. It necessarily has to lag. You can't do the receiver side before you have the transmit side. So,
and that's not quite done yet, is it?
no, but and all the research is sort of like all the same people working on it. There's only so many experts in these areas. So we are documenting kind of what the receiver capabilities need to be, but that's a much smaller task than the actual transmission standards themselves. This is a very complicated development, and it's integrated. It's the first IP, Internet Protocol based broadcast standard. So they kind of went back to the drawing board and said this needs to be integrated with broadband from the start. So it is a very different way of doing broadcast TV.
Yeah, how is that happening? How is online IP, Internet Protocol, being combined with over-the-air? I mean, I guess, as you say, TVs now have online access and Wi-Fi and so on. So you build a TV with a ATSC 3.0 tuner, it's going to combine those two. I guess it's maybe not as strange as I originally thought.
Yeah, so I guess in effect, smart TVs do that today, although it's not intended to be an integrated experience. So you may be looking at one input or looking at your built-in smart TV app or however it's structured. So you may be streaming Netflix directly to your internet or Ethernet or Wi-Fi input on your TV. So in this case, they are meant to be integrated together. There are a couple of benefits. There are some really interesting things you can do around interactive TV. There's better things you can do around emergency alerts where you can do more customization. There's also audience measurement and some other things you can do. So if broadcasters want to have like free content and some non-free or some other services they want to offer, you probably need a back channel to accomplish some of those.
Man, this also brings up the problem or the issue of that we've heard a lot about lately about companies tracking your viewing data or even spying on you, with the TV's built-in camera or microphone. I mean, we've heard some of these stories, and I wonder if ATSC 3.0, with its integration with online connectivity, might open the door wider for such activity.
So I think the standard, there's two parts to that. One's the privacy portion, one's the security portion. It is ATSC is taking care of the security portion. So everybody, I think the awareness of having a built-in security from the start is much higher now. I mean, it just wasn't something that was needed with ATSC 1.0. So that's built in from the start. And the privacy questions, they're built in. Like, for example, CTA has a set of privacy policies. We did. Now that happened first in the health and fitness area, and the FTC here in the U.S. Regulates it. So I think it's a little bit of a separate question. But I mean, I understand the concern, but it is a regulated area.
Okay, well, good. Before we run out of time, I wanted to spend a little time on audio, because audio is another really important part of our of the home theater and of the audio video experience, obviously. And wireless is becoming very big. You sent me a picture, a PowerPoint slide of of a bunch of wireless earbuds. The iPhone 7 no longer has a headphone output, so you have to wear wireless earbuds. Aside from the problem of such tiny little things getting lost so easily, I'm concerned about the audio quality of wireless compared to wired. Has that gotten better lately?
Yeah, so you see some, obviously you see some good name brands here. And so the answer is yes, it has gotten better. This kind of goes back to our previous comment though. Consumers will, they're always making a trade-off and a choice between like quality and convenience. So
isn't that always the case? Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's probably true that they can, the most premium experiences, we see it in probably their audio components themselves. We've had some other conversations about high resolution audio components and where they fit in the market. So yes, probably the best experience is going to be wired, but I think as RF itself gets better, as Bluetooth gets better, the products themselves are going to get better.
Mm-hmm. What about wireless? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that. Go ahead.
I was going to move on, but if you had something else to mention there, please.
No, go ahead. We'll move on.
Okay, well, okay. I was going to pivot a little bit to wireless whole home audio systems like Sonos, like Denon Hios, Yamaha MusicCast, DTS Play-Fi. An AVS, and the reason I bring it up is that an AVS forum reader recently asked me a question about the interoperability between these different systems. And I believe that there isn't any. That if you buy into the Sonos ecosystem, you have to stay with Sonos products. Similarly with Denon Hios or Yamaha. Play-Fi is a little more generic. DTS has made it available, and several companies have included it. But wouldn't it be good if these systems could interoperate?
Yes. Yeah, this is.
I mean, I know you're talking
a version of the format question, right? So,
yeah.
So this is something the industry always, I think, works through. In this case, so Sonos served this market, created a product that turned out to be this latent demand for, and so they solved it using Wi-Fi technology, but with their own secret sauce. So standards, just in the U.S., standards are voluntary. In some cases, just the marketplaces themselves are competitive and voluntary. So I think that's what we have here. It would, I think when we will often hear CTA because we do work with the industry to write standards. This is one that I can say that we haven't been approached about developing standards for, and so I can't say that the market wouldn't benefit from it, but there hasn't been at least a groundswell so far for it.
Interesting. When this sort of topic comes up, I always think about my previous life as a journalist in the professional audio and musical instrument industry, which has this protocol called MIDI, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. And I was there as it was being developed, right after it was developed. But what was remarkable about it was that engineers from a bunch of different companies who were otherwise, harsh competitors to each other, Yamaha, Roland, Sequential Circuits, Opcode, I think, they sent their engineers into a room and said, make us something that will make our products interoperate. And they came up with MIDI. And 30 plus years later, it's still there. And people are still using it to communicate musical performance parameters between one device and another. And I sure would love to see something very competitive like this become more interoperable. I don't know if it's even possible, but it makes me think of that MIDI example where the competitors got over their competitiveness to say, you know what, we could all benefit from this.
Yes, and so we do have those success stories. HDMI is one. It's built on top of a CTA standard, and that was founded by 7 companies that got together and said, we need a simpler, all digital, content protected interface that also carries audio and remote control. And so they sat down and did it, pulled together some existing standards, put some other stuff on top of it, and we've been shipping millions. And Bluetooth and Wi-Fi
are other examples. You're right.
Yes.
You're
yes.
Right.
Yep.
Now, I believe you mentioned the CTA standard. I believe it's 861. Is that what HDMI and some of these other interconnection standards are based on?
Correct. So HDMI references CTA 861. Maybe we should have a more clever name, but standards like so Wi-Fi is IEEE 802.11 plus its children. Anyway, so 861 has been around actually for a long time. It defines all the formats that are available on the HDMI interface. So what happens is, it turns out there's a lot of negotiation between the source device and the sink. So in HDMI terminology, it's the display is the sink device, and so you pass information back and forth. The display is telling the source what it's capable of, and then the source is providing that. So what happens is the industry comes to us and says, hey, we got these new things we're trying to do. HDR is the best example in the last 2 years, where Blu-ray Disc Association and HDMI both came to us and said, look, we've got to get HDR to market. We need to be able to signal that the source has HDR content. And this is one case you don't want to get wrong. So the display needs to know that it is showing content that is graded, is made as HDR, or else you'll just make the wrong picture. You won't, you just won't do the right thing with the bits, with the pixels. So we incorporated that into our standard. Then HDMI and Blu-ray both referenced it. So a little bit of magic going on in the background, but it is standards based.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there are some examples of competitors coming together and agreeing on something. One last question for you is, how is high-res audio doing in the market? We actually have a graphic here, number 6, to show. And it looks to me, this has to do with high-resolution audio, HRA, component sales, that is devices, as opposed to content. Correct. And it looks like it's kind of flattening out.
Yeah, it is, but we'll have to monitor. So, it's a fairly new market. And so these are thousands of units. Now, this doesn't compare to like the number of TVs we sell. So, you see we're between, in 2017, we're projecting we'll be between 20,000 and 25,000 units. That's $15 million in sales. To kind of put it in perspective, so last year soundbars crossed $1 billion in sales.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, but high resolution audio is still kind of a separate component. It's a little bit specialized. So right now, it is it's really what we would call, I guess, the audiophile, the music lover and enthusiast category. It's some great stuff. I mean, the products are awesome. This is the other side of that quality convenience coin we talked about.
Yes,
so indeed. You're convincing consumers that, hey, you really can do better than these compressed files on some cheap earbuds. So but it's slowly taken off, and they're very good products.
The question is, and we get back once again to the issue of consumer experience versus reading about it or writing about it. And the real question is, does the average consumer hear enough of an improvement in high-resolution audio to make it worth the extra money to spend to buy these high-res capable components and the high-res content itself? You have any research on that?
No, so those get to be some pretty complex studies doing subjective measurements like that. So I think it's that's one that I think consumers will buy if they're happy with the experience. So we know it's always the streaming services are always going to be trying to do better. The compression formats are always working to do a better job. But I mean, the truth is, this is the difference between compressed material and our definition of high resolution audio, HRA, is better than CD quality. So it's characterized by like 96,000, typically 96,000 samples per second and 24 bits. So it's really good stuff.
As opposed to CD, which is 44.1 kilohertz sampling rate and 16-bit resolution. So that definitely is better. The question is, how much better do people perceive it to be? Yeah, and I agree with you. That's a complex question.
Yeah, so I have not seen data on that, but I know to ask it another way around, there's definitely compressed music that you can tell that you've given up some of the sound quality.
Sure. Yeah. Which with high resolution you won't be, and so that's a pretty big difference. I do agree there.
Yes.
Well, hey, thanks so much for being here. We've come to the end of a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Scott.
That's Brian Markwalter, Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association. The website is cta.tech, T-E-C-H. So be sure to visit there for more information about what the CTA is doing. You can always find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. And you can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/HTG and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Ralph Potts, AVS Forum's own Blu-ray reviewer. And we're going to be talking about our favorite Blu-rays and Ultra HD Blu-rays. So it should be really interesting, and I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.